It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We're redoing the whole business website, so that's the best way to reach me right now. oppermaninvestigations@gmail. Fascinating topic today. I don't even know. I guess I just know what's on the surface. Rabbit hole: the vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Our guest today is Chris Williamson. You can find him. He's got a podcast called Vanished Podcast. You can find it at vanishshow.com. Also, too, he's over there on Twitter at VanishedPod. He's also on Twitter at Chasing Earhart. Me and my friend, this guy's busy. Me and my friend's body. This guy is everywhere, man. So vanishshow.com, and the website for the book is intotherabbithole.net. Mr. Williamson, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Ed. I am honored to be here with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for making time. It seems like you spent all your day creating Twitter handles, right?
That's part of the plan. That's part of the plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I tell you, when I first started building up my Twitter, I was shocked at how much response I got from that. I've been ignoring it for years.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah. Absolutely.
Before we get into the book, Into the Rabbit Hole, the vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. I never even heard of Fred Noonan. But tell us about yourself. Who's Chris Williamson?
Yeah, well, I've been doing podcasting for probably about 6 or 7 years now, and started pre-research on what would become something called the Chasing Earhart Project back in 2007, 2008, around that area, and started reaching out to folks back in 2017 to work on an Amelia Earhart project that was tentatively titled Finding Amelia Earhart. It was just a working title, basically. And we started that project, ended up working with over 200 museums, guests. It was the largest Earhart project ever put out. We were working on a documentary that's currently sort of halfway in development right now, trying to get distribution for that. And we had an accompanying podcast, Chasing Earhart, the Chasing Earhart podcast, and that went on weekly for about 100 episodes. And so we put those out. And then way back in 2019, I started what would now become Vanished, and originally was called Vanished Amelia Earhart. It was meant to become a 16-part investigative series that was just going to be a little more gritty in style, and we introduced a concept called trial by jury, which is basically the concept that the show is built on, and the concept that the book is now built on. So Rabbit Hole is my first book, and it's basically serves as a written transcript with a lot of new information for what is now season 1 of Vanish, and it's all about Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan.
Well, and this Vanished podcast, what other topics of people? It's on all topics of people vanishing besides Amelia Earhart, and who else then?
Yeah, so season 1 was Amelia Earhart, and then we decided to break season 2 up and to do a shorter sets, so about 5 set series or 3 set series. And we covered season 2 covered Jack the Ripper, we covered John Wilkes Booth, we covered D.B. Cooper, and we ended with Henry Avery, and that was season 2. And season 3 we just announced, and forgive me, I don't know all of them. I think we're going to cover Zodiac, we're going to cover Alcatraz, we're going to cover Amy Johnson, we're going to cover Jesse James, and a couple other ones for season 3. Once we launch that. So it's a historical mystery podcast that covers historical vanishings all over the world, and they have to fit that sort of historical MO.
Oh yeah, but some of these people you mentioned, I'm not aware of them vanishing. Like Wilkes Booth, he vanished, and
Yeah, it's an interesting MO. So basically, for it to fit our show, there has to be a given researcher that's working a specific theory or something that ties into the show. And the idea that with Booth's particularly is we worked with a gentleman by the name of Nate Orlowick, who for 50 years has been telling everybody who would listen to him that Booth did not actually die, did not get shot in the tobacco barn in Virginia in 1865. It was actually somebody else that got shot, and Booth actually escaped and ended up living his life and growing old and dying very, very very old man many years later, and that sort of takes us to different states, takes us to Oklahoma, takes us to Granbury, Texas, and all these different spots. So it fit our MO, and we worked with Nate to try to present sort of this theory as an alternate history, and my co-host sort of did what she does, and she sort of defended history as it's written. And that's kind of what we do in all these shows. Some of them you might be sort of shocked. Booth disappeared? Well, probably not, but this is what people are saying, and this is actually what the alternative theory is, and we try to push that theory and put it to a trial by jury, put it to a test.
And essentially, you do hear about these stories about people who theory that they faked their death, like Elvis and stuff like that.
Sure,
you know?
sure, yeah. So you have some that tie into that, and there's some that fit beautifully into it, like D.B. Cooper. He jumps out the back of that plane on Thanksgiving Eve. He's never heard from again, and we don't have an ending, we don't have a beginning. It just depends on the suspect you present. Same thing with Ripper. No one ever discovered who Ripper was, his identity. So he never was around to be prosecuted or anything, sadly, because of the heinousness of those crimes. And then you have Henry Avery, someone like that, who is the richest pirate to ever live, and nobody really knows the name of Henry Avery. They know Blackbeard and some of the other ones. So we try to cover some cases that are a little less known. I think you'll see some more of that in season 3, and then certainly it's kind of throughout season 2 as well.
And have you found this sort of like an old controlling hand that throughout history that kind of rewrites history and makes these people disappear? You know what I'm talking about? Is there a thread? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We haven't really had a whole lot of thread, but now that you say that, there are some tiny threads that are very interesting. For instance, I won't get too deep into the weeds here, but with Jesse James, there is one of the concepts we're going to sort of present in season 3 during the Jesse James segment is the idea that Jesse James and John Wilkes Booth actually knew each other, and actually knew each other very late in life before they each died. If you're going to believe the idea that they did not get in fact killed, as history says they did, these men ran into each other and actually knew each other. And so there's like little threads that will tie given cases together that we cover, but it's not like a thread that weaves throughout everything we cover. I wish there was, and it's other than just the idea that someone disappeared off the face of the earth that was really well known. That's sort of the given thread.
All right, great, man. Vanished podcast, vanishshow.com. Sounds like right up my alley.
It's fun. It's a fun show. We get a chance to take everybody through the investigations with us. So we start out with an investigation. We literally present a trial by jury. We go into a mock jury format. We go into a full courtroom audibly. You can hear the difference, and it's a kind of an audible presentation. And then we come out of that into post-trial discussion and discuss everything. And we certainly did that with Earhart, and that makes up a lot of the book and all that jazz. So.
And do you have a co-host?
I do. Her name is Jennifer Taylor. She's a former criminal defense attorney. She now works in I think construction litigation. I'm not sure. Forgive me, Jen, if you're hearing this and that's wrong. But she started when she worked with me in the beginning. She was a criminal defense attorney out of Austin, Texas, and so I had this concept to do a trial by jury with these cases, and she was able to sort of breathe life into that and help me create that trial by jury and help create what the listeners now hear and will now read, hopefully, when the book comes out.
That's right. And I noticed that your name is alone on the book. So I guess when it came to publishing the book, she vanished, right?
Well, she's definitely one of the stars of the show. She's in most of the book. But yeah, I mean, I think I put my name on it because it took me 2.5 years to edit the original show into something you read from something you hear, and it's, as you probably can understand, that's a very monumental task to do that. That was she's off doing other things that I'm really excited for her to be able to announce and talk about. That's going to really send her to the forefront of not only the Earhart investigation, but maybe some other ones too. So she'll have her plate full very shortly.
Oh, interesting. Okay, maybe we can have her on the show next.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Who is Amelia Earhart?
Gosh, how much time do we have? So Amelia Earhart was an icon at the time of her disappearance. She was an aviatrix. She was in the golden age of aviation. She sort of came up with a lot of other very well-known aviatrixes at the time. And she was a woman who basically burst onto the aviation scene and then just basically shattered that glass ceiling and took everything she had and ran with it, broke multiple records, set multiple records in various different aircraft. She was the first female to fly across the Atlantic. Even though she flew across as a passenger the first time, she was just on a plane with another group of people. And then she did it solo on her own after that, and that's when she sort of shot into the stratosphere as this iconic explorer, this woman that was sort of fearless. She crossed the Pacific Ocean on her own. basically broke multiple altitude records. She was sort of breaking onto the STEM scene before STEM was an acronym. She had this partnership with Purdue, who financed her Lockheed Electra plane that she disappeared in. And in 1937, just shy of her 39th birthday, her and Noonan were sort of at the very end of their journey, which sort of adds to the tragedy of it all. And they fell short, depending on who you believe, either ran out of gas or maybe something more nefarious happened. And they basically vanished off the face of the earth. There's no oil slick. There's no wreckage. Nobody's seen Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan, or their Lockheed Electra ever since. So it's been it's been the holy grail of aviation, certainly, and really one of the holy grail historical mysteries of this planet since for 85 years now coming up on.
Wait, and who was Fred Noonan? I've never heard that name before.
Yeah, so Fred Noonan was a pioneer of navigation. He worked for Pan Am and actually did a lot of work for Pan Am when it comes to mapping a lot of the routes that the Pan Am clippers would take across the various oceans. He was just a giant in celestial navigation at the time, and he was one of those people that if you were going to do a flight like this, you'd want to have Fred Noonan aboard your aircraft with you because he was probably the best in the world at the time. So he was just a pioneering navigator, an expert in celestial navigation. He was a seaman. He was he had many titles. But he was on board that flight with her, and a lot of people don't realize that. They believe that she disappeared on her own, but no, he was on board. There were two people on that flight.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I never knew there were two people.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that she was financed, because one of the questions I was going to ask is, who was financing all this, and why'd they pick her? And you said Purdue, and like Purdue University?
Purdue University, you got it right. About a year and a half before she got, they financed her plane. They sort of, she was President Edward C. Elliott at the time, former president of Purdue, saw her lecture, was just enthralled by her, and just thought she would do really. He was very progressive when it came to trying to get women involved in Purdue at the time, and he thought maybe bringing someone the stature of Amelia Earhart onto Purdue and making her sort of the face of women at Purdue would be a sort of a smart move, and he wasn't wrong. She was hired on as a consultant and somebody who was going to work with Purdue and sort of develop their programs there to sort of make it so women could be more than just homemakers. They could be engineers, they could be pilots, they could be mathematicians, things of that nature. And Earhart was actually spending a lot of time in the classroom consulting, speaking with women, lecturing to classes. There was going to be they were developing a lab there with engines, workable engines that people could tinker with, and women can sort of get to know sort of the engineering side of things on aircraft and all that jazz. Purdue saw the value in her, and certainly used her, to sort of get some more popularity at the university and how to make that a more popular deal. And she had that relationship there, and I think it was sort of just getting started when she took off. And they believed in her enough to invest in what they called, they labeled as the Flying Laboratory, which is her Lockheed Electra 10E. And that was the plane that she took delivery on and ultimately crashed in Hawaii, and they had to rebuild, and there's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, they invested in it. They funded her flight, and initially they believe, still to this day, some of them at Purdue believe that it's their plane if it's found. So it's an interesting scenario.
And what do you call it? What year, like what time frame was this in history?
Yeah, so she disappears in 1937. So July 2nd of 1937 is when her and Noonan disappear. That's when they lose contact. That's when everything goes down. That's the day of reckoning for them, basically. So this is all leading up to about a year and a half or so. But prior to that is when she kind of came onto Purdue and really started to establish that relationship there and that foundation. And so
during this period of time, 1937, what else was going on historically with the women's rights movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, women weren't just, they were sort of, everything was just sort of getting off the ground. They were, when it comes to pilots, they were sort of looked down on. They weren't really, people didn't believe that they could fly, they could do it. They sort of were looked at as sort of a circus act. If you go back a few years earlier to 1929, that was August 18th, 1929, actually, to be exact. That was the Women's Air Derby. That's when, they had many air derbies at the time, but not a female one, not a cross-country one like that. And they had some of the brightest and most, basically a Hall of Fame list of women in aviation compete in that. Women were just not thought to be as successful as men generally. They were not able to do some of the things that men could do, particularly. That was sort of the male sort of viewpoint, just the society's viewpoint at that time. And Earhart just simply didn't believe in that. She wasn't raised that way. She was sort of raised a little differently, that, hey, if you wanted to go play basketball, if you wanted to go, spelunking, if you wanted to get into aviation, you could do all that as a woman. Her mom was the first woman to climb Pikes Peak, and she did it in a dress and some boots. She came from really healthy stock. People behind her that were really doing some of the same things that she wanted to do, breaking those same kind of molds. So in that time, it was just women just didn't have the rights that they do have now. And it's sort of, we talk about that all the time. Would she be happy with where we're at right now at this point? And it's always an interesting conversation to have.
Well, but I think even at the time, most men would be agreeable to having, the women out there, splunking, as you say, or playing basketball, as long as dinner was ready on the table when they got home.
Yeah, right. That's the rub, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you can do those things, but don't forget to make my dinner. That's kind of, that's an attitude that at the time was just very. Earhart just didn't really feel, applied to her. She had a very famous relationship with a gentleman by the name of George Putnam, who was her husband. And he asked her multiple times to marry him, and she declined multiple times, and finally wrote him a very well-known letter. If you look, you can Google this letter. She talks about not wanting to be tied down, and she says, if in a couple years we decide it's not right, you need to let me go, and I'll do the same thing for you if that doesn't work for you. And she didn't want to be called Mrs. Putnam. She was Amelia Earhart. She was very progressive when it came to women having their own identities, even within the marriage, and I think that's sort of what screams to people now, even that you had people at this time that had these identities that were trying to fight for rights, just general basic rights, women's rights, and she was one of those people to do that.
Gotcha. Okay, so now Rabbit Hole, The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. What are some of the theories then you have on her disappearance? It wasn't just what I guess the most common theory is just it was a common plane crash, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's you start with that. That's the foundation, and it's certainly the foundation for the case that we present in the book. I mean, if every case has got a crime scene, and the crime scene in our case is, she was flying over the Pacific Ocean. She was about, depending on who you believe, and this is where it gets a little hairy, but she was about 200 miles out, maybe 100 miles out from Howland Island, which was this little, if you Google Earth it, it's this little speck, this little floating needle in the largest haystack on the face of the Earth, and she was trying to hit that so they could refuel. And once they were to refuel there, then they could make it from there to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Oakland, and they were done. So it was almost, they were 95% of the way done with the trip. And the whole idea is that she just fell short of Howland Island. And it is somewhere below the surface of the ocean, roughly 18,000 feet down below the surface right now. And a lot of people are looking for that plane, and millions of dollars have been poured into individual searches of people who are sort of throwing their hat in the ring just to see if, okay, I've got this spot, I think this is where it could be type deal. And that's the basics of it. The basics of it is that she fell short. And there were just a multitude of little things that added up to her and Noonan having a really bad day that day, and it just didn't work out for them. That's theory number one, basically.
Well, and how long? Because I guess today you can go around the whole world in a plane like in a day, right? In 24 hours.
Right.
You're right. Now, so how long did it take them to get that far?
They were flying about just shy of 20 hours at that point. So they left from Lae, New Guinea, which was their jumping off point, and they were about 20 hours into the flight when they started running into trouble. When they started getting to the point where she was saying very famous lines like, gas is running low, we're flying at 1,000 feet, unable to reach you by radio. There's a really famous line she says, we're on the line 157337, which is a sun line, and that's what they would have been doing with Noonan on board. They would have been trying to find the sun line so they can navigate and try to an attempt to find Howland Island. She said things like, we must be on you but cannot see you. The problem was they never established two-way radio communication. There was a boat, a Coast Guard cutter, called the Itasca, that was laying in wait off Howland, and that's what it did. It was doing what it normally does, which was to find, to bring in planes that were in the area and refuel them properly and get them off and running again. And they were frantically trying to reach her, and she never established that two-way radio communication. So once she takes off from Lae, and there's footage on YouTube, you can see this. Once she takes off from Lae, and they get this bumpy, bouncy takeoff where it looks like they kind of barely make it off that cliff at Lae to get over the water. That's the last time that anybody ever sees them or comes into contact with them, according to the official record. And now, if you start going into some of the theories, they're definitely seen and interacted with again. But that's another story.
Okay, now give us an idea, because in my head I'm imagining like some single prop plane. You know what I mean? Like maybe with a rubber band, right? So, what kind of equipment did they have?
It was state of the art. They called it the Flying Laboratory for a reason. It was made by Lockheed. It was a Lockheed 10 Electra, 10E Electra. They had 10As, they had 10Bs, they had different versions of that Lockheed. So it was think of it as like a special version of that Lockheed. It had dual Wasp engines. Our 134 Wasp engines. I'm probably wrong on that. I apologize, but dual Wasp engines, and it was basically state of the art. It also had extra fuel on board. They had these really large fuel containers, and that's been actually a subject of debate on some of these potential wreckage sites that have been found. Are those containers in the plane? That would be one of the dead giveaways. But they had the ability to they had extra tanks, so they could actually fly as far as they possibly could. And we have ranges everywhere from 2,500 miles and all the way to to 4,800, 4,900 miles, depending on who you believe. Could go a long way, but it just depends on who you're sort of thinking or believing there as far as that's concerned. So it was a state of the art plane. It had had the radio antennas on it, had the DF loop, which is a type of radio antenna that's on the front of the plane, sort of toward the nose of it. And as a matter of fact, that antenna is on the back cover of the book. She's looking at that antenna. That's so you can kind of get a good image of that. But yeah, it was definitely fully loaded. But they were really concerned about weight. Weight was a really big problem, especially as they got farther into the flight and they got more tired, and it was a really big task. When they got to Leh, they were even in Miami, when they were going through Miami and going toward the early part of the flight, they were getting rid of as much weight as they could. I mean, down to the pounds. Just hey, is it 20 pounds? Get rid of it, because they were worried about what could overweigh the plane and make it burn up more fuel and everything. And of course, they didn't anticipate some of the stuff that they would run into. So.
Now, from the last point of contact, right, with I guess civilization and the team, off the plane there, till the time that they realized it was missing, and they started looking for it. What kind of time frame are we looking at there?
Yeah, about 20 hours, about 19, 20 hours or so was when they left Leh. They flew straight because you're not landing at that point. You're either going into the water or you're getting to your next destination. So about that time frame, and that point is when they were getting really low on fuel, and they started doing those call outs, a lot of the ones I mentioned earlier. Hey, we're about 200 miles out. Okay, we're about 100 miles out. So they're getting fairly close to the very end there, and they just can't seem to find the island. We don't know if maybe they were in an incorrect position, maybe, and they were just never going to find the island. Some other alternate theories believe that they went and actually kind of happened across another island, or actually deliberately turned around when they realized their flight radius wasn't going to work for them. So the idea about 20 hours in was something's very wrong, and they were running into a lot of trouble and a lot of unanticipated headwinds and things of that nature that were burning more fuel than they anticipated initially.
Now, I know my questions are very simplistic, and your knowledge of this, you know all this minutia right off the top of your head is just incredible. So I don't really.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No,
it's impressive. It's impressive.
Thank you.
I interview a lot of people. Yeah. The Rabbit Hole, The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart, and Fred Noonan. So I really encourage people to get out and get the book and check out the podcast to vanishshow.com. But now, what type of, how did she know that she was 100 miles out? What kind of instruments did they have at that time that could accurately estimate that?
Yeah, well, the instrument was a person. That was Noonan. Noonan really she put all of her stock in Noonan, Ed. I mean, she believed in Noonan. They had a lot of private conversations. He sort of sold her on the idea that, look, I'm the best in the world at what I do. I'm really good, and he really was. Despite sort of the outcome of this particular flight, it really, a lot of stuff ties into to Noonan not being actually, the problem. The whole idea was that they just were, they were maybe off in a certain direction. And if you're off by just a little bit, celestial navigation wise, I mean, you're going to be off by a lot. It's not, a little mistake can really cost you a lot. And I think that she definitely had radio equipment. Like I said, she had the two-way radio. She had two different frequencies that she was going to be, a daytime and a nighttime frequency she was going to be checking in on, depending on where she was at. Depending on where, if it was day or night, where the plane was located at that given moment. But a lot of their equipment failed. The two-way radio communication failed. Neither one of them were very good at Morse code. They actually had somebody early on in the flight, before they left, when they were in Hawaii and they ground looped the plane, which is sort of another story. Early in the flight, they had somebody that could do Morse code, and I think about that all the time. I think about, well, if they could at least do rudimentary Morse code, they might have been able to get a bearing on them and try to go find them, even if they got crash landed or something. So yeah, they just didn't have a whole lot of experience on certain things, and that hurt them.
Okay, and we'll almost have to come up to a break soon. But then again, at that period of time in 1937, what kind of success rate was there for trying to track down crashed planes, like even nearby, you know what I mean, and recovering survivors from crashed planes like that? Yeah,
I mean, it really depends. I mean, everybody tells you a different story. I can tell you based off of some of the experts I've talked to in our Facebook group, and just some of the people that have been on the show and everything, that they could have probably done a pretty decent job of finding her if they had proper communication, I think, or at least triangulating her signal. And in fact, there's a great debate about one of the other, ties into one of the other theories, the castaway theory, the idea that if she actually was able to land on an atoll there or on an island, that she was able to send radio distress calls up to 5 days after she supposedly landed. So if you believe that she put the plane down successfully, then that's impossible to do underwater, because the right engine has to run, and if it's underwater, you can't run it. So a lot of people believe that she actually did land, and she was actually sending out radio distress calls, and they were actually being picked up by people all over the world. But there's also a lot of fakers out there even back then, and there's a group of people that highly believe that the radio distress calls, the post-loss radio signals, should be taken as gospel, and there's a lot of people that believe that they should sort of be thrown out entirely, and that's one of the things we debate sort of in the book.
Okay, so there is a theory out there that she somehow crash landed and was sending distress signals after landing.
Yeah, and it would, in this theory, it wouldn't be necessarily a crash. It would be kind of a rough landing, but they were able to put the plane down in such a way that would enable them during high tide, or during low tide rather, I should say, to actually fire up that engine and send those signals. And then when high tide came in, they would stop the engine, obviously, and to ride the high tide out. And then when the low tide came back in, they would repeat the process. And they did this for about 5 days, according to a lot of folks who believe in the castaway hypothesis as it's been come to know.
Okay, but it seems to me that we would find wreckage by now. We would find some kind of a...
Yeah, absolutely. The theory goes, in a nutshell, and this is sort of theory number 2, and what I always tell people when I explain these is you got to look at sort of ground zero. Ground zero is Howland Island, and if we go to Castaway, which is Nicomaroro Island, or it would have been called Gardner Island at the time, it was changed to Nicomaroro. But if you look at that puts them roughly about a little over 400 miles away from Howland Island. So they would have had to have had enough fuel to be able to get to Howland or to Niku. And the idea is that they just sort of happened upon Niku, and they were able to put the plane down, because at this point they were beyond E at this point. They were getting ready to crash, and they put it down, and they were able to have enough fuel to be able to run that right engine on idle and send those distress calls. So yeah, it's an interesting scenario, and you have to sort of buy into it all the way.
Gotcha. Okay, let's take a commercial break. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, sure.
It really is, man. And you've been podcasting about this one topic how long?
Oh gosh, since probably like 2022, so like 2017. So about 5 years. We've done quite a few episodes on this topic, on both the legacy and the disappearance side.
Incredible. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is no stone unturned.
Not anymore. At least not by us. Yeah, not by us at this point.
Okay, man. I admire the tenacity, man. That's great.
Yeah.
Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Now, the book is not even out yet. This is in pre-orders. Okay, so I say sometimes the ink's not even dry yet. The ink's not even wet. It hasn't even been printed.
Okay? Yeah.
So I think this is the earliest we've ever done with an author. Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. It's by Chris Williamson. You can find it on Amazon, but check him out on his podcast on vanishedshow.com. There's a website specifically about this book, intotherabbithole.net. You could find him there too. He's all over Twitter. He's making several Twitter handles as we speak now.
As we speak, we're manufacturing Twitter handles. That's what we do. Yeah.
The latest one is Guest Ed Opperman Report.
Yeah, right.
Okay, but I hate to keep emphasizing this, but how impressed I am by the way the prolific Twitter here. Let's see. Yeah. Vanished Pod, at Chasing Earhart, at Me My Friends Pod. and vanishshow.com. We talked about that already. Now Chris, we were just talking off the air a minute ago because you know this topic so well, this Amelia Earhart topic. And you've written a book about it now, and you're able to answer every question without hesitation. What about when it's time to do your second book? Like, what other topic are you I hate to say obsessed, man, but
that's obsessed is a fair word, I think. The whole idea is to sort of to continue this series and go through all the series we covered on the show, because a lot of people don't choose to consume their content audibly. They want to read something, they want to hold it in their hand, it's tangible. And so the next one we're doing right now, I'm working into it right now, is the D.B. Cooper book. We're going to do that on it's going to release on the 51st anniversary of D.B. Cooper and the 1-year anniversary of the retrospective for the show that we did. We did a 3-part series on Cooper that aired the night of the skyjacking, the 50th anniversary in November of last year, and this one will come out November of this year, hopefully, if all my timing is correct. So the whole idea is to have potentially 2 books out by the end of the calendar year, and we'll do Earhart first because that's my first love, of course, and then we'll do Cooper after that, and then we'll move on to Booth, and then we'll move on from there. So yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back and talk about Cooper.
Yeah, sure.
I was just contacted by those fellows, those cold case fellows,
Yeah.
They have a documentary series coming out in a couple of months, and some new information they have about Cooper. Everybody's got new information, right?
Yeah, that's where it's at. It's something new. New is good. So.
Okay, so now we were covering the different possibilities. One is that she crashed into the ocean, but then again, there's no oil spill, there's no fireball, none of these things, right? The other one is she did somehow manage to land on the beach when tide coming in, tide going out. They're starting up their engine, the Morse coding,
right?
All this. No, what are some of the other possible theories?
Yeah, there's 2 other ones that we covered in the show that are really important. One of them is called the Buka theory, and if you Google search Buka Amelia Earhart, you'll see the Fox News article that hit a while back. That's championed by a gentleman by the name of Bill Snavely and his group Project Blue Angel. They are searching for Earhart in the area of Buka, which is about roughly the halfway point between where Papua New Guinea would have been, Late New Guinea would have been, and Howland Island would have been. The whole idea in the theory is that Earhart Noonan made an executive decision based off of their flight radius. If people don't know what flight radius is, it's basically how far can you go on half a tank of gas. That's basically it. There's more to it than that, but that's the general concept. The idea that they realized they weren't going to make Howland Island because they burned a lot of unanticipated headwinds and a lot of other things that kind of came into play that would affect their fuel greatly. And they decided to turn around. They made an executive decision. It was nighttime at Buka. At that point, they would have been in the nighttime frequency, and Howland would have been during a daytime frequency. So there was just a mix-up there. They were not communicating, as I mentioned earlier, the entirety of the trip correctly. So the idea is that they actually dealt with some really bad weather, fierce weather over Buka, and the plane was struck by lightning. The left wing of the plane was struck by lightning, which set one of the engines on fire. There's a lone witness to this particular theory. He's a little boy at the time, though. It's indigenous people. He had never seen anything like this before. He was kind of standing on the beach at the time that the plane comes out of the clouds and crashes into the beach, basically, and it kind of falls off an underwater sort of embankment there, and it sits right now, as we speak, in less than 150 feet of clear blue Pacific, which is really important to know. It's not 18,000 feet down. It's very doable. However, it happens to sit in one of the most really insane underwater environments on the face of the earth, and it's basically been wrapped and engulfed in coral. So what you've got is this shell of an airframe, basically, and wrapped in about 4 feet of coral all around it. So it's very difficult for them to get down there and actually determine, is this her plane or not? But they're working on it. They've had a couple of expeditions out to Buka, and they're planning on a Buka 3 to try to finalize this thing and rule this plane out. Or rule this plane in, depending on what they determine is down there. So that's Buka. That's one of the one of the newer theories from based off the Earhart case. It's only about 15, 18 years old compared to some of these other ones that are 40, 50, 60 years old in some cases. So yeah, it's a relatively new theory, and that's Buka.
Are there any theories, perhaps, that something nefarious, like she was sabotaged or anything like that?
Yeah, there's one last one, and it's probably the most interesting one. It's known as Japanese capture. It's how we end the book because it's one of the more robust ones. And the idea was, again, this is sort of like one of those umbrellas, a choose your own adventure game at this point, because you have all these different ideas that maybe she was a spy. Charles Lindbergh was a spy. They use a lot of famous people as spies back in that time, and the idea that her and Noonan were spying for the U.S. government, trying to get over to the area in and around the Marshall Islands pre-World War II. They were trying to take some basically it was a reconnaissance mission, right? So basically they're trying to take images. We do know that Earhart was an avid photographer herself. We do know that she met top secret with members of Kodak, which at the time was like the biggest photography company in the world, a couple of weeks before she took off on the second trip or the second attempt at the round the world flight. So the idea was that they were there. They were either shot down by the Japanese, depending on which direction you go, who you believe, or they landed in the Marshall Islands and landed in one of the harbors there, and they were taken into Japanese custody. And it gets really interesting. Japanese likely didn't know who they had at first. Didn't know who they were. They just knew they were American. They were white. Everybody in that area, a lot of people in that area came into contact with either Earhart or Noonan or the Electra or a combination of the three in different various ways. And for basically since the 1960s, they've been saying the same story, and the idea that there was roughly 200 or so eyewitnesses throughout the Marshall Islands and Saipan, including people in the U.S. military who were stationed there post Pearl Harbor, all the way up to Admiral Chester Nimitz, who has a whole fleet of ships named after him now. Basically all said the same thing, that Earhart and Noonan were in fact in the Marshall Islands in Saipan, and that they died in Japanese custody, and they should be awarded medals. They should be considered among the first casualties of World War II. So it's a really interesting, passionately argued, defended, criticized, however you want to look at it, theory.
Oh, wait a second. So you're saying that some of the people who claim that she was captured by the Japanese, these are like high-level military folks? And
Yeah, there were some people. So it started out with locals, right? Started out with the Marshallese, and everybody calling this white American pilot, they would say, or they would call her Earharto instead of, or Amira, because they can't pronounce certain words, so they would say Amira or Earharto. There was rumor of Noonan being injured on the Noonan's injured on a couple of the scenarios. Actually, there's rumors that Noonan was injured on the crash or the landing, depending on how you look at it, and that he was actually attended to by local Marshallese, Saipanese medics that actually treated a wound for him. Starts with that, and then it goes all the way up to post World War II, and some military GIs who were there on the island station in that area that supposedly found her briefcase with passports in it and a lot of her papers in it. And of course, none of the stuff we have now, which is unfortunate. But supposedly found her briefcase and supposedly believed that she was basically captured by the Japanese and ended up in their custody, and ultimately was executed by their hand, basically.
That's interesting. Any credible indications that she was intelligence, or that Noonan was intelligence, especially that if this is being funded by Purdue University, any indications that they were involved in funding other intelligence operations?
Never any indication that Purdue was directly involved in funding any intelligence operations, but I would say that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan are sort of open for debate. Earhart, if you go all the way back, and we talk about this early in the book, is Earhart really had a distaste for war. She was very very passive. She wasn't one of those people that believed that war was the solution, and she was sort of in the ear of FDR at the time. They were really close friends, and she was even closer with Eleanor Roosevelt. They were all pretty close. They ran in the same tight circle together, and there was never any evidence other than speculation on whether or not Earhart, depending on what you believe, Earhart was sort of forced into it after the ground loop. This was sort of Purdue's original plane that they gifted her. She ended up crashing in Hawaii on a ground loop incident, which is sort of like if you take a grocery cart and you run it and it kind of turns inward, just kind of let it go into an aisle, it turns inward, kind of the same thing. The plane crashed and destroyed itself. So the whole idea was maybe she was sort of coerced into it after her plane crashed and she had no other opportunities, no more financing. That was sort of, she was gambling her entire future and her everything on that flight. So maybe she was sort of coerced into it. But there's nothing concrete that anybody's been able to prove as far as Earhart was a spy. This is why we know, kind of thing. It's more speculation, and that sort of just makes it brings it to a fever pitch as far as the speculation in the case goes.
Okay, and what about Freedom of Information Act? Did anything ever come out? Any kind of files that would show anything?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's a gentleman by the name of Les Kinney who's like, the walking encyclopedia on Earhart. He's probably the smartest man I know when it comes to Earhart, and he's filed hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests, and he's gotten very little on them, just because a lot of them get denied. And we know that there is an Earhart file. We know that it is in possession of either the National Archives or under protection from from FOIA. And we know that it exists. We just don't know what's in it, and that's sort of the interesting part of it. It could be the most boring file you'd ever read, but it could also be a very juicy file with some really interesting information. And I think with a lot of the FOIA stuff that's being released now, and the 302s, and a lot of the stuff that came out with the Cooper case recently and continues to come out with that, Earhart's even older than that. We're sort of baffled as to why the U.S. government would continue to hide whatever's in the Earhart file. If it's not relevant, then you should release it. And if it is, it could change everything. It could rewrite history.
Gotcha. I tell you, I'd love to talk to you like 6 months after the book's out, because that's usually when those tips start coming in from people that are involved. That's when so. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's get down to it. The UFOs, Bigfoot. What do we know?
Star Trek Voyager. She was she into an alternate dimension. I mean, look, it's all, what's really interesting about Earhart is people continue to use her likeness, her image, her celebrity, her iconography to put her into different pop culture things. I mean, a good friend of mine, Jay Ferber, who wrote the Elsewhere series, which is a graphic novel, like a comic book graphic novel that you can get now, put her into another dimension and actually tied her in with some other people that I won't mention because I don't want to spoil it for people who want to go read it. But it's really, really good, interesting. And then you have all the, the Earhart stuff, all the continued documentaries. I mean, there's podcasts. People do one-off podcasts on her all the time. She's going to continue to be a topic. It's one of the hottest, mysteries of all time when it comes to not only just aviation, but just in general. Nobody knows what happened to this woman. And think about it as the most famous person on the face of the earth disappearing today. And nobody ever knowing what happens, 8 decades later. And that's where we're at. That's where we sit. We don't have a whole lot of leeway there. And it just gets more and more speculative as you go along. And it's a really hotly debated and contested topic. And it's sort of ironic that she would become such a polarizing figure in 21st century and everything. I don't think she would have been happy with that.
Yeah, the book is called Rabbit Hole, The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. The author is Chris Williamson. You can check him out on VanishedShow.com with his co-host Jennifer Taylor at VanishedPod on Twitter. Now, we were talking a little bit off the air. I was asking, you're so obsessed with this. It's like an intervention. Yeah, you need an intervention, man. But and you said that next you wanted to delve into D.B. Cooper. What are you going to give us that's new on D.B. Cooper? That's another one that's been covered. Earhart really hasn't been. Yeah.
Absolutely, and all credit goes to a gentleman by the name of Darren Schaefer who does the Cooper Vortex podcast, and he's sort of a kindred spirit for me. He did Cooper, I went to Earhart, and we sort of did the same thing. And he's still putting out new episodes on the Cooper Vortex. I would highly encourage people to check that out. I mean, it's a case that is we don't know a whole lot about. Like I said in the beginning, we don't have an ending, we don't have a beginning. Nobody knows who Cooper was. He existed for roughly 5 hours on board a flight, and that's it. And we know that he hit the ground. We know that at least the money hit the ground because we know about $5,800 of the money was buried in a beach at Tina Bar, or at least made its way into an embankment at Tina Bar. We don't know if it was physically buried or if whatever the case was. But there's a lot of scientific work that's going on with that. I'm hoping that we can put together stuff that will make people think, that will make people form their own opinions, that will breed new investigators and breed new fresh sets of eyes for these cases that are so cold they should be covered in ice. I mean, Earhart and Cooper have not really been touched in 85 years and 50 years respectively, 51 years coming on respectively. So it's they're really major marquee cases, but we can't seem to get anywhere with them. And we hope that the books will just sort of generate buzz and give everybody a snapshot. These are the suspects. These are the theories. This is what we did. We're going to put it to a test. And then you are in the jury. You decide what you believe, what sells you. And we go through this in the Earhart book. It's the same concept. Every theory has different sets of evidence to support it. If you're sitting in a jury box, what's going to sell you? What's going to convince you? And that's the whole premise of this book. Can I push a given theory and present it to you in a way that you can accept that that is actually what happened? Or is Jennifer's cross-examination of my witnesses and presentation of alternate data to support historical record, is that going to be enough to say, no, she probably just crashed in the ocean and that's that? That's sort of the fun. And I think that's what we'll do with Cooper, and that's what we'll continue to do with every case we cover in the show and potentially in future books.
Right, and you were saying this before too as well. Now you're telling me that in the Vanish Show, VanishShow.com podcast, that you actually treat this as if it was a trial, like litigation, where she takes one side and you take the other side. Is that how it works?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we present a case. We take it to a courtroom setting, and it's all done audibly. So you get that theatricality and that entertainment. But we really try to add really base it off the rules of law. We got real legal objections. Real processes going on here, and we treat it the same way. It's a mock trial, and I think it's a really interesting, fun way for these kind of cases to be presented in sort of a fresh way that gets the people involved. So if you're listening or if you're reading along, you are the jury. You are being who we're pitching to. You are part of the case. And the whole idea is we ask people to sort of take that position and take it seriously. If you were sitting in a jury box, how would you feel if you had all this stuff? Does junk science come into play? We have a lot of legality stuff that comes into play into the courtroom session part of it. And it makes for a really interesting show, and it makes for a very compelling and different read. It consumes very differently. That's what we're hoping that the book will do, is it'll consume differently than any other Earhart book that's come before it.
And then who acts as the judge in this?
So the judge is basically like a faceless person. The judge is actually in the show. We'll have someone read lines for the judge and just like accept or deny certain things depending on how we're going to do it. They'll hear it and they'll basically make an exception. So if she's like object to a given witness being testifying in a courtroom or whatever, or testifying in our show, she'll make that known and the judge will basically make a call. But it's just sort of like serves as like a faceless judge basically. It's not a real judge sitting down on the case. Like Jen's a real lawyer, of course, but the judge is not real. Couldn't do that because then we'd start getting sued if we started trying to act like it was a real courtroom. So we try to make that happen. But we are looking into possibilities of maybe expanding trial by jury and making it feel even more realistic than it does now. And that's part of the challenge of the show and future books.
All right, VanishShow.com is the podcast, and the book is called Rabbit Hole, The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. And you were telling me off the air that it's like a serial podcast, so the next content's going to be coming out in October.
Yeah, roughly around October. That's usually when we start. When we started season 2, we actually started it right around Halloween, so we're going to try to shoot for that as well. We've also got the Cooper book potentially coming out at the end of November, so we'll see. It gets crowded, so we might have to push it. Season 3 kicking off till after the Cooper book comes out. We might do it in the same manner. We'll have to see kind of what happens. But yeah.
And the next season will be more of Earhart or just Cooper?
No, we're done with Earhart. The book is sort of my coup de grace. I did, 100 episodes of Chasing Earhart, 16 episodes of Vanished, dedicated to Earhart, and then now this book. I don't think, alluding to kind of what you talked about earlier, what's new, right? What can you bring? Well, we can bring a fresh perspective and a way to consume this. That's brand new. But what new information do we have? We have the retrospectives sprinkled throughout the book, 3 year later retrospectives from people who participated in the show, who will basically give you some insight into kind of where their investigation is now, or what they feel now, and how things have changed or not changed for them. And it's really kind of an interesting, you get some interesting tidbits there. But that's the idea is to kind of bring every case that we cover to a book form for consumption that way too.
Okay, the book is Rabbit Hole, The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. The author is Chris Williamson. The book won't be out. You can get pre-orders now, but the book will be out on July 2nd, 2022. Mr. Williamson, thank you so much. Definitely get a hold of me when the Cooper stuff comes out. And,
will do.
And I'll look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you so much.
A pleasure, Ed. Thank you.
Good night.